Hello everyone, this is Ben Ryder from the Academy of Gaming, Film and Animation, and what we're going to be looking at today is taking the dwarf that we have modelled and UV wrapped and rigged, and we're now going to start looking at animating a walk cycle. So it's one of 3 animations that we get you to do in stage 2. We do an idle, a walk and a run, and then we teach you how to get it into Unreal. But first of all, there's a couple of things you're going to want to need. And first, that's to make sure that you do have a rig with IK constraints and everything. You're going to want to play around with these settings up here to get it exactly the way you want it when you're animating, and we'll talk more about that as we start animating. You want to make sure that everything is set up nicely there. The other thing we're going to do is make sure you have a reference. I'm going to use the reference that I have in here, which is just the walk cycle here, but you can use your own. There's plenty of them out there. Really what we're looking at, and there'll be different theories about what frame rate you want to go with and everything. That's the run, so I won't put that one in there. We'll go import image and then go here to walk cycle and then open. So we want to make sure this is facing the way the character is facing. Now I could flip this around, but then my numbers would be around the wrong way. So I'm actually just going to go here to orthographic and just go left. So that way I can then flip this around, and yeah, we've got something that looks a little bit closer now to what we want. So again, this is a guide. It's not meant to be followed absolutely. The real thing I'm looking at here is for the rise and flow and the frame numbers, okay? So I want to change this down the bottom here to 25. Before I animate, I'm just going to go in here and check that this is set from play every frame to 24 frames, and then make sure it's 24 there, and I am good to go. So there's a number of ways of doing this, but the fastest way I found is finding your sort of mirrors. So sort of 1 and 25 are going to be the same frame because we want it to loop. 13 is going to be its mirror. It's going to be the opposite way, but the same keyframe there. 4 and 16 are the same. 7 and 19 and 20, 10 and 22 are the same. So they've just flipped around the limbs and everything. So if you've got an idea about what it's doing, then you don't have to keep looking at the drawing and get yourself all confused. So I'm going to put the first ones in first. So these ones here. So I'm going to grab the IKs, and remember we're only keyframing the IKs, not the skeleton and not the chest. The mesh, we are only putting in the IKs here and moving them and keyframing them down here. So I'm going to bob this down a bit, lean it forward a bit as well, and I'm going to go with the front leg here back, and then rotate that foot. And then I'm going to get this foot here planted there, and then just lift up the leg a little bit there and just move that there. I'm going to move this down a bit. I can see that the orthographic still needs to be a little bit bigger for it to be accurate, so I'm just going to do that just to make it a little bit easier to see where the up and downs are. There we go. And the arms are always opposite to the legs as well. We also notice that knees kind of flare out a bit, so we'd better fix that and put them in place as well. Just so they're facing forward, making sure your feet are facing forward, and then as well, just moving that in. Now you can get orthographics for the front, so you can sort of get the hip rotation and everything. That's a bit beyond what I'd expect from this sort of level and everything. I'm quite happy as long as the arms sort of move opposite and everything. The reason I like going with the dwarf character is because, okay, so if you notice this and it's like pulling the arm down, you don't want that, just click over here and now it will allow you to move that and it won't pull the rest of the body down. The reason I like the dwarf is because he's so blocky and everything. It just makes the movements like a little bit easier to kind of hide. If this is your first time animating, then it's not so daunting because you can get away with having a very sort of clunky, heavy sort of look based on his armor and stature and everything. So it just makes it a little bit easier to animate when it's your first time. But we've got that there. So now I'm going to select all of that and then press S on the keyboard. That will create a keyframe here that is keyframing these values right here, the translate, rotate, to like basically put them into place. So if I move this now to the very end and I press S again, now we've got a looping motion. Now we don't have much of a motion at the moment because it's just the 2 frames that are exactly identical, but now we're going to go to its mirror, like I was saying before, the 13. So it's exactly the same except we're just swapping these legs around. So we're just going to move that down here, rotate it down, pretty much almost an identical spot to that other one there. I'm going to get the back leg this time and then move it out to here, rotate, and there. Again, you don't want to get too particular about it because it's a matter of iterations. You get your first iteration of the walk cycle out first and get it moving, and then you start adding detail to it. So in a minute you're going to see what the first iteration looks like, and it's not great, but it will kind of work. So again, I'm just going to move those knees into position to make sure that they're straight, and that's there, and then keyframe it. So now if I press play, we should have a very, very, very basic walk cycle. Okay, now like I said, it's basic, it's not moving, so let's talk about what's missing so we can understand why we do these other key poses. So obviously what's missing is the feet don't ever lift off the ground, so you'll see that here in the 7 and 19, you can see the feet, and 22 and 10, you can definitely see those sort of feet off the ground. The second is there's no weight to it. It doesn't go down. It looks like he's ice skating. So we're going to put in the up and down, and we're going to lift up the legs, and that's going to be the two basic things we're going to look at here for that. You can look at other things in more advanced walk cycles, but I'll be happy if you can just achieve those things. So we're going to go now down to 4, I reckon. So in 4, we're going to bring this orthographic across. Again, the main thing you need to remember when you're animating for games is your character needs to stay on the spot. Imagine they're on a treadmill, because that's basically what they're doing. The capsule will move the character in the level, not the actual character itself. So the character just sits inside the capsule, and you'll see that later when we get into Unreal. But here we just need to plant this foot down, put that down here, and we need to kick this foot up and actually lift it up off the ground. So he's leaning into this. This is the sort of passing pose here. We're going to then move this down, get some weight behind it. And again, this is exaggerated, but when you're first starting out with animation, you want to exaggerate. You don't want to sort of do anything differently there. I could move the hands, but I'm going to leave the hands alone. And the reason for that is otherwise you get this really jittery sort of like Terminator from the first Terminator film, sort of stop motion look about it. More is less sometimes with the arms. I tend to just leave them sort of swinging on the 1st, 13th, and 25th keyframe. So I'm just going to keyframe that now, and straight away you're going to notice that there's an improvement to this walk. You can just see at the start there, the feet sort of comes down, actually plants. So now we've got something. So now we're going to do the same. Like I said, we're going to find its mirror, which is on 16 there. And this is just to keep things like a little bit consistent so that it's not too bad. I'm just looking at this now. Okay, that's why, because, yeah, cool. Sorry about that. So I was just thinking, that's way up off the ground, but that's because it is off the ground. That's good, that's what we need to fix. So we're going to pull it over here, and we're going to do the exact same thing now, except with the other foot. We're going to plant this foot down on the ground, and then we're going to lift this foot up off the ground so that it actually sort of makes that step happen. And then we're going to grab this hip joint here, and then just pull it down a bit. So his arm is really heavy, he's making these really big stomping sort of like feel to his steps, and really getting that weight in there. So now when we play it, we can notice there's a bit of that up and down. Well, more precisely, there's a bit of down movement to it. We can really feel that step when it hits now. Now we need to get the up pose. So I'm going to go right ahead to the 10 and 22. So we're going to go back here, move it over to 10, and start looking at, okay, what do we need to start exaggerating a bit here? Well, we really need to lift up this hip just to start with. So I'm going to grab that hip and then move it up. Again, careful not to try and move it too forward. I know there's a lean to this character, but we don't want to overdo it. And that should be that past there and everything. I'm wondering how that's going to look. We'll see how it looks. This is our sort of 3rd iteration now, but now that first half of the walk should look really good. There we go. Now we're actually starting to see some sort of movement and some impact to the ground, everything, some rising there. Happy with that. So let's now go from 10 all the way through to 22. Again, move it across. You don't have to, but I just like to. It helps me keep track of where I am and what I've done. So then there, up there, move that again upwards, that to there, and then making sure this foot is lifted up like so. Now it can be tricky. Sometimes you can get yourself tied up, and in doing so you can end up creating those things. I don't think I actually keyframed that. I didn't. This is a problem. I always have this. I'll put things into there and I'll forget to keyframe them, and then they'll just snap back. So you just got to be aware of that, and always keep an eye on the timeline where you are at all times. It should really be move the orthographic, move the timeline, then start moving here. And then once you're happy, S. And now we got some real sort of like rhythm to this. You know, it feels like it's actually doing something good there. Okay, so I mean, we could stop here. I'm just going to give the final touches here now to number 7 and 19, but that's all it is. Like I know that seems like not that much, and again we could go into much more detail if we wanted to, but we're just looking for function here. You know, so this is Digitech. We're just looking for the I guess solution to it and everything. We're not necessarily looking for the artistry behind it. This isn't creative arts where we sort of look at the aesthetic and do all those sorts of things. There's plenty of resources I've given for that if you do have a desire to do that sort of thing. And I've just realized I'm on the wrong keyframe, so that was a bit of a waste. Where am I? This is number 7. Yep, 7. Cool. But yeah, just don't spend ages on this trying to make the walk cycle perfect. It's not meant to be perfect. It's meant to be functional. Because again, if you want to be an animator, absolutely go look up those resources, go do the thing. But at the moment, we're trying to give an overview of the entire pipeline and process from modeling through to character. There's going to be some things in this that you're really good at and some things that you're not good at. And that you either are going to say, right, well, I'm going to need to practice that and get better at that, or I'm going to need to, you know, find someone else who does that better than I do, who I can work with. Which is often the case, you know, and you'll never be good at everything. There'll be certain things that you really care about and want to make perfect and everything, but don't express your concern for things through trying to be a perfectionist about them. If you really want to show care toward the project, keep the big picture in mind, because you don't want to be that person who's holding up the production because you've just got to get this leg perfect, you know. As you're going to see, we can always grab this, change this, make a small change to the FBX, and then just bring it right back into Unreal. So right now, our job is to get this to the programmers so they can actually turn this into a game. And you do not want to hold programmers up for any sort of reason, let alone just your need to be perfect about something. So what we have here is functional. It should work. And now we're going to look at how we can get this out. The hands are clipping through there, so I'm just going to fix that. And again, that's where we look at the front here. Cool. And then, yep, so when does it clip through? It clips through right about here. So let's just, again, like I said, you don't want to put in too many frames with the hand, because what you're going to see now is, yeah, that sort of thing happening there. Unfortunately, with the new version of Maya, this tends to inherit a lot of frames, and what I mean by that is this bone now has all these keyframes that I didn't put in there. So I am actually going to do something first before I do all this. I'm actually going to select that wrist, and then I'm going to get rid of everything from here, and then all of these ones as well. And what that will do is it will just reduce it back to its swing there, and that will stop it from looking really jittery, and it will allow us to put in extra keyframes that will allow us to go around the hip so that it doesn't collide with it. So at the moment it's sort of colliding about here, and because I have no other keyframes around it, I'm actually going to put it out just a bit like that. So it goes around, and then when it comes back here, same thing, out there just a bit. There we go. And see, it's just so much smoother now. If I had to go in there and put it in with all those other keyframes, it would have been a nightmare. So again, more is less. So this one definitely clips quite significantly. So I'm gonna figure out exactly, yeah, 7 should still do it, and that's where the other one is. So I should just follow form. So there, and then 19 out here. Cool. So now, yep. Now, people point out that video games don't generally run at 24 frames per second. That's more film, and that's generally what Maya was made for when it comes to sort of making 3D graphics. That's why, you know, your Y and X is this way, because they always think of a screen. But what you can do is, after you've got this and you've followed most of the orthographics, because most animation orthographics will reduce it down to either this or 12s, or whichever frame rate it is better for 2D, because that's where it sort of originates from. You can just go down here at the end, and I emphasize at the end, like once you're finished with it, and you can do that. And what that does is it just smooths it out, making it ready for games. And you might notice something in that animation now that you don't like and want to fix. But again, I stress, do it at the end, because what you'll notice here is these keyframes are now in between keyframes, because we keyframed it in 24 frames per second, and now we've got it in this. And that makes it a little bit harder just to move it around. So I'd recommend getting the animation right in 24 frames per second first, and then come back and do it this way. And then once you're happy with it and you're like, yep, cool, let's do that, now we can actually export it out. So let's do that. We're going to now select both the skeleton and the mesh. That's very important. And we're now going to go File, Export Selection. and we're going to call this an FBX. So if you don't see this down here, what you need to do is go up to Windows, Plugin Manager, and then you need to just search FBX, and you'll see both of these files here. This is the one you actually need. That one's for a different thing that they can use that sometimes helps out a little bit more with games, but I'd recommend just doing it this way first. It's one of the few times where I'll tell you not to go to the options key, but actually just go to the native sort of save thing. I just find this a little bit easier to work with. So we're going to call this, I've already got walk here, so you'd call it that. I'm just going to call it walk 3. And then we come down here, we need to make sure that animation is checked. And then we also need to go down here to bake animation. And it's already sort of calculated what those are because I put it into 60 frames per second. So it's now gone from 2 to 500 instead of from 1 to 25. And we're going to go down here to embedded media. That's going to get our materials in there. So as we go export like that, we should now be able to export it in, see it in FBX Review before we pull it into Unreal. Now it's always going to give you this, complex thing. You don't normally bake animations like this. There's probably better ways of doing this and getting it into Unreal and that game exporter and actually like linking in skeletons so you can do it live. But this is the old way, I guess, but it's also the way I found most reliable. So we've got that in there. Now we just need to actually open up that file. I'm just going to go to that file now and we'll show you what it looks like in FBX. Yep. So here's my Dwarf final scenes. It will be in the same place that you've got your files there. So walk 3. If you don't see FBX, just go open with, go down, more apps. It won't show it here, so look on PC and then just go into the C drive, FBX Review and FBX Review, and it will open up like so. And we can see here, I can now press play. And as you can see, it's really quite smooth and working just fine. And so now we can actually start looking at how to get that into Unreal. The run cycle is very similar to what I just did here. So I'm not going to go through that. I want you to have a go at that. And the idle is really just up to you. There's no real references for idle other than what you find. I would recommend not doing the idle over 24 frames in its length, like still have it at 24 frames per second, but put it over something like 72 or 96. And the reason for that being that if you have a really short idle animation, your eye's gonna pick up on the repetition really quickly and it will hate it. So my advice is, just sort of follow the links on here for the run and everything, but when you come to the idle, because there's no orthographic for the idle, just make sure it's over a lengthy enough sort of animation timeline so you get all of that in there. Cool, anyway, so that's that. Next we'll look at how to import that into Unreal. There's already a video up there, but I'm going to put an updated video because they've changed some of the enhanced inputs and I want to make sure that you all know how to use that. So good luck, and I look forward to seeing your animations.